Today, we are going to be continuing our Project Essentials webinar series that looks at Microsoft Project Professional, and it walks you through all of the steps in a little bit more detail than just a quick hit kind of a training. It goes into a little bit more depth. It goes through the scheduling best practices. And today is the fifth part of that, which is assignment planning. My name is Amanda Kuhlman. I am the operations manager here at Intigent, and I have been here for almost 7 years. And I am certified in Microsoft Project, in managing projects and portfolios with Microsoft PPM, and in managing SharePoint 2016. And I use Microsoft Project and also Project Online on a day-to-day basis. We use it internally. I use it several times every day to manage our own internal projects. So uh, hopefully what I have to share with you guys today will help you, walk through some of the pain points that I'm sure we all have experienced when we first start to learn Microsoft Project. So here is our webinar series. We are on Module 5, which is our assignments planning. We went through Modules 1, which is getting started with Microsoft Project. It walks through the different views. It helps you get familiar with the ribbons and the look and the feel of Microsoft Project, as well as defining some of your project options in the background that may be very important and critical for setting up your project for success. And we looked at Module 2, which is defining your project, the start date, the calendar, some of the key project level data points about your project. We focused on those two. I believe it was several weeks ago now. And then we went into our task planning, which we did break out into two different webinars. We had part 1 and part 2 that looks at best practices on how to add your tasks, and it walked all the way through from creating them to linking them to having constraints and deadlines implemented into your plan. And then our last webinar was about resource planning, how to set up your resources, what are the different types, and how you configure them and their data points and their calendars. And then today we are looking at assignments planning. And then we have 3 additional webinars coming up the next 3 weeks. I have a slide at the end that goes into it a little bit more detail, shows you when those will be and how you can register. That will look at project execution, and then reporting, and then some custom fields. So today our agenda is to talk a little bit about Intigent, who we are, and then we're going to look at assignments planning, which we're going to look at adding different resources to your tasks, your work, your cost resources, adding the tasks, and what does it do to your plan? What happens if you add one resource and then you come back later and add 2 versus adding 2 at the same time? We're going to go through a couple of different scenarios, and then we're going to look at checking your plan after you've had resources assigned. How can you get a little bit more information and a little bit more detail about your schedule after that? So who are we? We are Intigent. We are a consulting firm whose primary focus is Microsoft Project, Project Server, and Project Online. We are expanding also into SharePoint and Dynamics. We do have experience with those, but the project suite has always been our key focus. We have implemented it, we have trained on it, we have helped people in their PMO build out processes and how to marry a tool like Microsoft Project or Project Online with your business process, and how you can get the two to work in harmony for the most streamlined process you can have. We are Microsoft Gold Partner in Project and Portfolio Management. This means that we have several instructors on staff, and our company has been recognized by Microsoft as having the gold standard, the highest level of partner level that Microsoft will provide. We do also have several courses that provide PDUs with the Project Management Institute, the PMI. And those are our full day courses. We do have several. We have some 1-day classes, some 2-day classes. So all that information is on our website if you want to go over there, and you can see what all we offer. So before we jump into our assignments planning, we are going to do a recap of our last webinar. It was about 2 weeks now. And so I just want to do a recap of some of the stuff that we had talked about, which did focus on resource planning. So last week we talked about setting up resources. We had done all of our tasks planning, we have connected them, and now we needed to add resources to our project. We looked at the different types, We looked at some of the information, such as max units and the different rates. And we also looked at resource calendars and how those intertwine with the other calendars you can have, such as the project calendar, to create a very harmonious and dynamic schedule. So here is a visual for the different kinds of resource types that you can have in your project. You have your project resources, and the three main types that project supports are work, material, and costs. Work resources are the people and the equipment that complete tasks in your schedule. They are the efforts. They usually have hours associated with them. It's going to take me 8 hours to complete the task. That can be broken down even further into it being people or it being equipment. And then the people can even be defined further. Maybe your organization only looks at defining your resources by roles or by skills, which would be considered generic resources, a placeholder until you can replace, or you can just use generic resources. You can replace that with an actual named person. I am giving this task to a very specific person rather than a role or a skill set. And then you have your cost resources. These represent financial costs that are part of your plan. They do not have any work associated with them. They do not impact the scheduling in that manner. But what they do offer is if you are using project to capture your costs, then you have one-off costs like travel expenses. That is it can be a fluid number. It changes from task to task. A cost resource is how you'd want to capture that. And then there are material resources. These are consumables that as the project executes, you can add them. An example of this one that we went through in our last webinar was concrete. You can say you have pounds of concrete and you identify a cost associated with 1 pound of concrete. And when you assign that resource to a task, you say, I used X number, and you let project do the calculations for you. So in terms of work resources, the max units field is a pretty important field to understand. It represents the availability and capacity that your resources have for project work. Some actually do have full capacity. They are 100%, which project defines as 8 hours a day, available to work on project tasks. But a lot of times that is not how it works. There are operational activities, maintenance activities, and they may only be available 75%, a couple hours a day for work. And understanding the max units and keeping that updated appropriately for your resources is a key feature in being able to have that schedule accurately reflect as close as possible what reality will be. When you do have some resources that are over allocated, project will alert you. It gives you a red man in your indicators column to let you know that your resources are over allocated, which means they have more tasks and work assigned to them than they can accomplish in a day. If I have defined a calendar as the resource calendar is having 8 hours of work available a day, but I have scheduled them 10 or 12, or I've even seen maybe 20 or 30 hours of work in one day, project will alert you. It will not stop you. You can still do it, but if you want an accurate representation of what's going to happen, then paying attention to that red man and being able to adjust accordingly is very efficient and definitely a best practice. Associating pay rates with your resources will also give you a cost aspect to your project schedule that you may not have had in a different scheduling platform if you're new to project or you're wondering what all it can do. By assigning each of your resources with a pay rate, project will automatically calculate the cost of assignments for you. So just giving it that piece of information, whether you choose to look at costs now or if that's something that you're looking at down the line, just doing the act alone of providing the pay rate to a project will calculate that cost for you. And you can see it does do that assigned work for that resource times the pay rate equals their cost, which makes sense. And there's a couple of different views that we'll walk through that you can see how to view that information. And the last that we had talked about for our resource planning was the resource calendar. There is a project calendar that controls the project schedule. That is the highest level calendar. That is the one that will rule most of your tasks, and that's how it will flow through. One layer under that is your resource calendar. This controls the specific working and non-working times for a resource. even if that is different than your project calendar. If you have some resources that are only 4 hours a day available for project work, you can still have your project calendar be a standard 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but have some resources with a little bit narrower time frame to work. If they're only available 4 hours and I assign it to a task, the task will use the resource calendar to calculate that time. It will do a blend. It'll say it's a working day. That's what the project calendar tells me, but the resource calendar says this person is only available 4 hours. And so, it will lengthen some tasks or adjust things accordingly to give you that accurate representation of your current calendar. So we're going to look at our project. This is the one that we've been walking through with our webinar, walking through building and a couple of different aspects. And we're going to look at our resource sheet. We're just going to do a real quick run through, a recap of some of the elements that we talked through during our last webinar. That webinar is available on our website. All of our webinars are. They are free to watch, so you can go back and you can take a look. You can look as many times as you'd like, and they are straight on our website there for you to see. So we have our list of resources here. We have a couple, let me see here. Here's what I want. We have several resources of different types. We identified several work resources here. As we work through today, our assignment planning, we're going to assign them to our tasks and do some what if scenarios. We have adjusted some of their max units. You can see my project manager resource is only available 50% for his tasks. We have a couple of resources who have some constraints in their time. That we have Barbara, who has a very specific resource calendar to only allow her to work certain times of the day. We also put in some material resources where we have identified the cost per one unit, which I have identified as pounds for my material resources. So when I assign this to a task, I give it a number of units and it will calculate that cost. And we added in a cost resource as well. All you need to enter your cost resource is the name and type of cost, and then you give it a cost at the time that you associate it to your task. We're going to look at our Barbara Simmons calendar. We click on the resource name here, and then we come to our project ribbon and click on change working time. You see at the top here, I do have the option to also be able to edit any of my other resource calendars or the project calendar itself, but I'm going to look at Barbara's. So we did put in some exceptions for her here. We had some vacation time for her, which you can see is reflected up here in our visual. So we can easily see if we click on these days for her are non-working. So any time that I have assigned to her, we'll skip right over these days and be scheduled for her very next working day, which is November 15th here. So we looked at how to add in exceptions, which is just typing them here, how to edit the default work week. I believe our resource, Amy, had a different work week. So we went in here and we edited her work week. We went into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and updated that to have more hours. And then we marked Friday as a non-working day for her. So any tasks scheduled to start on Friday will automatically be pushed out to the next Monday if it is for this resource. So now we're going to jump into our assignment planning, and we're going to talk through several of the best practices and how to do this. So once you have determined what resources are going to be on your project, it may just be a few, it may just be a handful or a guess at project start. You can always go back and add as your project progresses. But now it is time to do your assigning. And what does that do for you? What does assigning resources to your tasks actually give you? Well, what it gives you is a visibility to see who is working on what tasks and when. When are they available? When are they not available? When do they have a lot of projects stacked up at one time? And it also lets you see, do we have enough resources to complete the work? If I have a schedule and it's a set schedule and I add my resources and it shows me that there is too much work for the team that I have, then project will show you that. It'll give you some over allocations. It'll show you that those people are over allocated and have too much work on their plate so that your organization, you as a project manager or your manager or whoever makes those decisions can determine if you need to hire more people or if the project needs to be lengthened or what kind of business decision goes behind, the information that project will provide you. Project will also tell you if you are assigning resources beyond their capacity. This kind of rolls into our last point where it will tell you, I have 8 hours available for work. I have one working day available. That's all I have. But you've scheduled me for 20 hours of work in one day. No matter how hard I try, it's very unlikely I'm going to do that work. And, that needs to be addressed. So project will show you that as well. So one important thing to mention about Project is it is a very dynamic scheduling tool. You can take full advantage of it by giving as much information as you know about your project and your tasks and your resources to Project, and it will do all of those back-end calculations for you. When it does a scheduling pass, it does a forward pass, which means it starts from front to bottom, and then it does a backward pass from the bottom to the top to make sure that everything makes sense and has its place. But a lot of times, if you're new to project, assigning resources may seem like a big obstacle. And so that's something that some users do choose not to do, meaning you can just work with your tasks and linking those and those dependencies there. When you do that, you do need to give your tasks more information than you would if you had resources, because you're really only giving it that one piece of information, only task level information. So you just need to make sure that you give it as much information as you can, especially as you look into managing that project and execution as it's gotten started and you have actuals to put to your project. And how do you manipulate it to show effectively? So when you assign, we're going to go forward with the assumption that you are using resources for your project. You want to go ahead and generate those assignments for everybody. So when you assign a resource to a task, that will generate an assignment. There are several different ways you can look at assignments. The first one is that for a task. So if you have a task and you have assigned one resource to it, one assignment has been generated. If you have a task and you assign 5 resources to it, you have 5 assignments that have been generated. Each specific resource for the task is considered its own assignment. So when you do assign that resource to your task, project uses the available max units, which we just took a peek at, that 100% available for work or 50%. And it looks at that task's duration values to calculate the work that corresponds with that. So you can see our calculation here. You have your duration versus assignment units equals the work. So an example of this is if you have a task that is 40 hours of duration, or 5 days, and you multiply that 100 times the assignment units, then it's going to automatically calculate for you that that task is going to have 40 hours of work. And we did talk about the difference between work versus duration in one of our previous webinars. Work is the amount of effort, the amount of hands-on time it's going to take a resource to complete the work, versus duration, which is the timing. It's going to take me physically, it's going to take me 4 days to complete a task. And so they can be different. I can say, I have other things going on. It's going to take me 4 days to complete the task, but sitting here working on it, it's only going to take me about 8 hours. So you can give project both of those pieces of information. Another example of assignment calculations is if you have a task that is 24 hours or 3 days in duration. And I want to multiply that by the 200 assignment units that I have, whether that's one resource that is 200% available, if you have a team perhaps, or if you have 2 different resources assigned to it. And what that's going to do, that is going to calculate 48 hours of total work for the task. So, and unless you specify otherwise, 100% is the default that project will assign for a resource for each task that you assign them to. So it assumes that if you give a resource a max units, that time is available for the task that you've assigned. And there are some changes you can make to the task itself, to the work or duration, that will calculate a different max units for you. And I'll show you that in just a minute here. There are several different ways that you can assign resources. The first one is using the Assign Resource dialog box. So this is what it looks like. It gives you a list of all of the resources that are on your resource sheet, and it allows you to populate here the percent units and a cost associated with them. This way will not let you dictate exactly how much work you want each resource for a task, but it is an easy way to get those resources on a task for you. You do use a task-centric view like your Gantt chart or your task sheet to assign the resources in this manner. And here's an example of the Gantt chart. We have our content edit task name, and we have our assign resources dialog box up. And once we click the resource and we click assign, it will automatically populate that name in both the resource names column and also at the end of your Gantt bar. It'll give you a little check mark in that box to let you know that person is assigned. And then it calculates the rest. Again, you can see it automatically assumed that Carol is available for 100%, has 100% units, and it calculated a cost because I identified a standard rate for her. It calculated that cost for me. I didn't even have to type that in. I just assigned her and it automatically did that calculation for me. Another way that you can assign resources is your task form. This is my favorite way of assigning resources, and I'll show you why. But to be unbiased here, the task form will allow you to assign your resources, and it will also allow you to manipulate the amount of work that each resource has specifically. You can see here, this view is a split view. If you look in your resource ribbon, and then off to the right-hand side, there's a checkbox for details. If you select that when you're in any task-centric view like a Gantt chart, the task form will display underneath. And as you click through your different tasks in your Gantt chart, the information about that corresponding task will appear down in the bottom section. It'll show you several data points about that task. You can look at the work or the cost or the summary or the predecessor, successor relationships. You can look at a lot of data points about your task in detail down there at the bottom in conjunction with the rest of your schedule as a whole, which I find very, very helpful. So the task form down below is similar to the resource form that we looked at last time, except it shows you the task level information instead. You can also assign your resources using your resource name column. As long as you have that enabled, you can just insert a column if it's not there by default, and you can add in your different resources right there. You can just select one or two or three, however many resources that you have, and it'll calculate that. It'll add it in there for you. So we are going to come to our project. I'm going to go back to my Gantt chart here. I have my resource names column here. Let's see if I can, we're not going to really look at predecessors. I'm going to go ahead and hide that. I did enable my type column here so that we can look at whether the tasks are fixed work or fixed units or fixed duration, which does matter when you are assigning resources to your project. So I want to make sure that I can see all of our relevant information here. We have resource name, we have our Gantt chart over here. So we are going to go ahead and start assigning resources to the tasks. We've developed our tasks list, our work breakdown structure. We've identified what resources are going to be on my project. And so I'm going to go ahead and come here. I'm going to click on my project management task. Let's just go ahead and start at the top up here. I'm going to come to the resource ribbon and click assign resources. And it will pull up this assignment resources box. You can move it around so you can see what's going on with your task as you're assigning. I'm going to go ahead and click on my project manager. And I'm going to go ahead and click assign. And you can see as soon as I do that, it will allow me to, it automatically calculates, the units and the cost associated. It will also generate an indicator over here. You can see that my project manager is only 50%. So it put my number there for me. And then also in the Gantt chart over here, it lets you know the resources and then any changes to their max units you can see over there as well. So the one thing to be careful of in your assignment resources box is if I come in here to say, for example, Amy, and I want to type in 100%, as soon as I click off, I do not have to click assign. As soon as I click off of her, it will automatically assign her to my task. That may not have been what I wanted to do. So you just have to be a little bit careful when you're in this assignment resources box to make sure you're particularly intentional, unless you want to be able to see what it's going to do to your schedule there. We're going to go ahead and leave our project manager associated to my project management task. And I am going to just move right on to my scope section. And we have identified these tasks. We have labeled each task and then ended this summary with a milestone. We've connected them all together. You can see by some of my start dates here, the durations weren't long. So I'm going to go ahead and click on determine project scope, and secure project sponsorship. I know the same person is going to be responsible for these. I can just go ahead and highlight both of them. I'm going to also come back up here to the assign resources box, and I'm going to go ahead and assign two resources to this. I'm going to assign my architect, and I'm going to assign Brad Thor. So you can see as I did that, it was updating my duration. My fixed work, because I have a fixed work task, is going to stay fixed. It's going to stay constant. It's going to stay the same unless I manually tell it to do something different. But it will update my duration accordingly because of the number of resources that I have assigned to that task. Go ahead and close, and you can see over here, it put both names, both of my resources names into my task there. It also populated my work here by default. So I already have. So now we're going to come down into our next task, the define preliminary resources task. We are going to use a different method for assigning our resources here. We're not going to use our assigned resources box. We're going to come over to the resource name, and we're going to use the drop down. So you just click on it, and it gives you all of the options of your resources in your resource sheet. And so we're going to go ahead and click from Brad Thor from here. And I click off, and you see that it automatically populated 30 hours of work for him. Now I decide I'm going to come back and I say, I actually need to add some more resources to this task. Having just Brad's not enough. I need a little bit more manpower. So I'm going to come, let's pay attention over here. We have 30 hours of work, 3.75 days in duration, and I'm going to click on my architect. Off, it's going to leave that work consistent. It did automatically put that there because I added Brad, but because I have a fixed work task, it's going to keep that as the same. And it's going to use that calculation we reviewed last time that looked at work and duration and units, and it's going to calculate a new duration for me. So you can, and let's even do one more. Let's come ahead and add in Daniel to my task. And you can see even by doing that, the more I add, the work stays the same, the duration is what changes there for us. So let's see. We're going to come into our task form now. We're going to click on the view ribbon up here, and then over on the right-hand side, there it says details here. I'm going to click that. And then we can come here and we can even see more details about how project scheduled my resources for me and what it did to my tasks. So I'm going to click on my determine project scope task, and you can see, oops, I have my cost table enabled. I'm going to right click, look at work, and I can see that it evenly divided the amount of work for this task. It has 4 hours, and it evenly split that between architect and Brad Thor. I'm going to look at secure project sponsorship, and it's the same thing. It has 4 resources evenly divided between the two. Come here, and it's the same way as well. So I like being able to use a task form. I'm going to come to my secure resources down here. And I'm going to assign my resources using my task form here. I'm going to come, I can say I want to add Brad to this task. And you can see when I click away from it, when I make any changes, it does not automatically update my schedule. And it will not do that until I click OK. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you can see it generates that 4 hours of work for Brad. He's the only resource. He's 100% available. My units tell me right here, the half day duration task, it does the math. We have 4 hours of work. So from here, I'm going to come and I can say, I do need an architect on this. I'm going to click off and then I'm going to click OK. And you can see it did automatically split that. I mean, we looked at that in the other tasks as well. Here, by being able to see it step by step, makes it a little bit easier to visualize. But what I can do here as well is instead of having project automatically calculate everything evenly and splitting it appropriately, if I have a change that I would like to make, for example, I want Brad to only work half an hour, and then I want the architect to work 3.5 hours. In this view, I have the ability to change that. I'm gonna go ahead and click OK. And you can see I didn't change the work because my math still adds up. It did change the duration, which changed the rest of my schedule. You can see in blue. But I now have given project more information. I haven't just said, here's the duration, here's the work, here's the resource. I have even given it more granular information. I have said, I want exactly this amount of work to go to this person. So we're going to move on to our next section down here. You can see over here, it did accordingly with who I scheduled for the task first goes first. So I'm going to move down here to my analysis section. And these tasks are fixed units. And so just something to be mindful of, always pay attention to your task type when adding resources. If you get something a little bit funky and you say, why did it schedule that way? The very first thing I'd recommend you check is your task type because that may affect what's going on there. So we're going to look at our fixed units here. We're going to fixed units task. We're going to start with our conduct needs analysis. We're going to go ahead and come back up here. We're going to leave our details view open. Never hurts to see what's going on in your schedule as you're making changes. I'm going to click assign resources. And again, it brings up my dialog box. And I am going to add Amy to my plan. Let's go ahead and assign her. Come on, Amy. There we go. So assign Amy to my task. And you can see it automatically generated that 40 hours of work as expected. It generated her units, which is 100% by default, her cost associated because I have given the information of her cost in the resource sheet. And so now if I do decide to remove her from that task with nobody else being on it, it will also remove the work that's associated with that task. Unless I've given the work information to the task, adding the resource is what provided that to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add Amy back to my task. Decided I do want her there. I'm going to use my scroll to task feature here to scroll over where we want. We'll do that for our next one as well here. And so actually, we're going to come back up to our conduct needs analysis task. And we're going to go back to the resource ribbon, click assign resources. And we are going to replace Amy. We're going to say that we don't want her on our task anymore. So we're going to go ahead and remove her. So we see our 40 hours of work going to disappear. And we are going to add our project manager to that task. And just to see what will happen. Our project manager is only available 50% units. And so when we add them to the task, it does that same calculation, the duration versus times the units to give me a 20 hours of work for the specific task. And that is directly related to the amount of units that my resource has available for that project work. Go ahead and close. We're going to say the project manager is the task that we'd like for that over there. And now we're going to come down here to our fixed duration tasks. We have our task form enabled. And so we are going to go into our review software specifications task, and we are going to add Daniel Shackelford to our project here. So you can see it automatically generates 16 hours of work. We decided we need somebody else on this project, so we're going to go ahead and come in and we are going to add Brad Thor. And as expected, it will automatically split that work into two different sections. So another element of being able to assign resources is being able to control and manipulate the amount of work that is going to change or update or split or divide appropriately, however you'd like to view it when you are adding or removing resources to your task. So we did do some examples of what project will do by default. It will automatically split if it will automatically split, and then you have the ability in your tasks form to divide it even more granular from that. You can have that power. There is in Microsoft Project an option for effort-driven scheduling. And effort-driven scheduling is what allows you to control how project will calculate work on an assignment. So there is a checkbox, which I'll show you in the task form or in the task information box. But how effort-driven scheduling works is that the work will remain constant as you assign or unassign resources to a task. We have talked about our different task types. We have our fixed work, fixed duration, and fixed units. One of these has effort-driven scheduling checked by default that you cannot change. You know which one? It's the fixed work because the work is consistent. It's the same exact definition. And it applies here as well. That checkbox is checked and you can't change it if your task is fixed work. However, for fixed duration and for fixed units, you can go ahead and toggle that option on and off. And we'll go through some examples of what happens when you have it on versus when you have it off. Definitely important to pay attention to if you don't want your work to change and it is for some reason when you're adding resources, I would check the effort-driven scheduling. So also, as you add more resources to the task, your duration will decrease, which is what we saw in our examples. We saw it generated 30 hours of work, and no matter how many people I added to that task, the 30 hours of work stayed the same. The duration just kept going down and down and down the more people I added to that task. And in a similar manner, as you have resources that are taken off of that task, the duration will increase because your work can't change. It's consistent no matter what you do. And as you take people off of that task, and it makes sense. It's very common sense that it's going to take that task longer to be completed the less people you have working on it. So here is a screenshot of the effort-driven scheduling. You can see it is this option right here in your task form. So in our example here, we have copy, edit, and corp, which is a 5-day duration task, and Robin is assigned to it, Robin Wood. And so the calculation of what's going to happen is 40 hours of work for the task, 40 hours of work for the duration, rather, 5 days, times 100% units, and it's going to calculate 40 hours of work for that task. But if you decide that Robin needs help with that task, so you want to add another resource, we're going to add William to that task to help him out. We have effort-driven scheduling turned off. You can see that it is not checked here, which means it must not be a fixed work task. Because it's turned off, project will add the same amount of work for William. So it's going to calculate 40-hour duration or 5 days times 200 units because I have 2 resources at 100%. And it's going to calculate and give me 80 hours of work as a result of that. So it will also give you an indicator. Product will tell you, hey, you've done something. Maybe you should take another look at. I'll give you a second chance. Make sure this is what you want to do. Kind of indicator. It's a yellow diamond with an exclamation point in it, and below it you get a list of options. You can use the action list to tell project how you want it to schedule the work or the change that you've made. And so when you add another resource to that task, and it does generate a double amount of work, you can use your action list here. So in our instance here, we can say, what do you want to do? We can reduce the duration to keep the work the same. And if you want to keep your 40 hours of work consistent, then reducing the duration may be what you want to do. You can also increase the amount of work but keep the same duration. And you're like, no, I really like the amount of duration. I don't really care so much about the work, or it's fine to have more work. Then you can choose that middle option there. Or you can say, just reduce the amount of units that the resource is working per day, but keep everything else the same. Keep the work the same, keep the duration same, just reduce that amount of units, which will give them most likely a number in that parentheses, a 50%, 70% automatically calculated. So now we're going to come back into our project here. And we are going to specifically focus on that effort-driven piece here. So we're going to look at our software specifications task. We already have our little inspector there, but we're not going to take a look at that just yet. So we're going to go ahead and remove our resources from our task. I'm just going to come and deselect them. So now we have no resources, no work, and a task with 2 days duration. So we're going to come in here. I'm going to go ahead and add Daniel. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my effort-driven scheduling. So this is going to, any resource I add is going to also add more work to the task. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to add Daniel to my task. Let's see what happens. It gives 16 hours of work for the task as expected. You can see down here below, 16 hours for Daniel. He's the only resource on the task, so it makes sense. And so now we're going to come back and we're going to add Brad. Let's add Brad Thor to our project. And you can see down below, it added 16 additional hours. It has the duration that's kept the same. It just generated more work for my task. This is a fixed duration task, so it makes sense that it would do that, but it is also this effort-driven scheduling option here that is doing that. And if I add in even another resource, let's add in Amy, it will add even more work. She has a different percent max unit, so it didn't give her exactly the same, but it did add more work to the task. I'm going to go ahead and remove Amy. Decide she is not the resource we want for this task. I'm going to back up a couple. There we go. So now we're going to go ahead and remove all of our resources to get back to our task where we're not sure what's going to happen. Only this time we're going to turn on effort driven scheduling. This means that the work will stay consistent. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to add, just in the same exact order, I'm going to add Daniel, see what happens, and then add Brad. So we're going to add Daniel, click off. Same thing that happened the last time. It gives 16 hours of work for the task, 2-day duration, 100% units. Now we're going to come back and we're going to add Brad now. Now that our effort-driven scheduling is turned on, we expect that project will divide the work between both of the resources evenly. So now that we have added Brad, you can see down here, we still have 16 hours of work. And as expected, it did divide the remaining work between both of the resources that I have. I also have this indicator here on this inspector icon that tells you you made a change. Maybe there's something else you want to do. Maybe you want to take a second look. Maybe you want to change what you did. And so you can come here and you can say, do I want to reduce the duration and keep the work the same? Do I want it? This is what it did by default, but do I want it to do that? Do I want it to keep that 16 hours of work and keep my duration the same? Or you can choose to increase the amount of work, but keep your duration the same. This is the option that it did when effort-driven scheduling was not turned on. It did just increase the work, but it kept my 2-day duration exactly where I wanted it to be. So if you do have a duration-focused schedule, and that's primarily what you look at rather than work, then that may be the option you want because the duration piece is what's most useful for you for tracking your project. Or you can choose the third option, which is keep your work and duration the same, but change the units that the resources can work on this task per day. So that is what I want to do here. So I can come and do that. And if you have it being a different, let's go ahead and change. Let's add somebody else in here with it. So what are we going to do now? Now we want to do the units. So you can see what it did here is it changed the units that I had for my resources. So effort-driven scheduling is an important thing to keep in mind, especially as you add resources to your task. So we also have our cost resources that we have to assign. If we have some costs or expenses that we want to make sure that we track in our project schedule, we need to associate those with a specific cost resource. So we're going to let's scroll back up to the top here. We're going to come to our determine project scope task. And as you can see on our resource sheet, we'll flip that back there for just a second. We do have a cost resource of travel on our project schedule here. So that's the resource we're going to use. We're just going to say there is travel associated with that task. So we're going to come to our determine project scope, come up here to assign resources, find our travel. And in this assign resources box is where I can type in the cost that's going to be associated with this resource. I'm going to go ahead and click $2,500 here, click assign. And as you can see, it will add both the resource name and the cost associated over in the resource names column here. And it will also add it as a resource at the end of my Gantt bar. So you can see down here below, I'm still in my work table. If I want to focus on costs specifically, if that's what I'm interested in, I can right click and click costs. As you can see, there are a couple of other options here, depending on what you're interested in, your resources and the predecessors or relationships, or if you just want to see task notes. But I come here, I can see specifically for this one task I have selected, the different costs that's associated. It has a resource cost because I provided that pay rate for these resources. For both Architect and Brad, you can see it's a $300 and $200 cost for this assignment, respectively. And then here I have my cost resources of work of $2,500. The reason that in my work column here that there is no work across, except for our overtime work here, across the board for cost resources is that cost resource does not have any work associated with it. It is purely a cost identifier holder, a way to relay additional costs that do not have an impact on the schedule. You can also update here in your task form if the cost changes, or you can also assign it here. Let's go ahead and remove our travel costs. So we're going to come and we're going to assign it down here. We are going to say, I have my travel. It's going to cost me $5,000. First, we have to assign it. Then we can give it a cost $5,000. Click OK. And in a similar fashion, it will assign in the resource name, and then over in the Gantt chart, it'll show you it there as well. And as your project progresses, you need to make sure you save your baseline at the very beginning of your project. And as it progresses, you will put actual costs towards your different cost resources, and it'll calculate what some remaining cost is for you. So if you have a number you need to start at, you need to make sure as your project executes that it's going according to schedule. Being able to see it at a task by task level is a very good way to do that. So after you have updated your entire schedule by adding different resources to it, it's important to know what's going on even at a more granular level than just, I know the amount of work and duration. There are a couple of different ways where you can check the different elements of your plan, whether it's work or cost that you're interested in. The first one here is the task sheet. This example has the cost table displayed. You can also do it with your work or a couple of different tables, which I'll show you. And this is a really good way to see the cost details by task. You can see that there's no resources on this view. All it tells you is your costs for each. You have your summary, so you can see at a roll up, I can see that acquisition is going to cost $10,500, and then I have a detail underneath of what that's going to be. I can see that my pages review is going to be $14,580, and I can see how all of that is added up from all the tasks below it. The resource sheet is a very helpful way to see, similar to task, only it's a resource centric view. I can see how much money is each resource costing me to be on my project. This doesn't look at any tasks. This is purely for Carol Poland for the entire project. She's going to cost me about $13,000. If I have actuals associated, you can see it will automatically do all these calculations on the back end. It'll give you the variance compared to your baseline if it is set. It'll compare your cost with your actual cost as your project executes and give you a remaining cost associated from that. So it's a very good way to checkpoint your project as you go through to make sure that you are on track. You're not going to be over budget. The task usage view is a very helpful way to see in a more granular manner than just a set of tasks and their cost, or just a set of resources and their cost. It's a very helpful way to see you have your task and then your resource underneath it for the entirety of your project, which again, each generates its own assignment. So we're going to look down here at our copy edit. We have one task. It has two resources. So there are two different assignments associated, and each assignment has its own cost. Robin working on this task is going to cost me $880. William working on this task is going to cost me $1,100. The resource usage view is a very good way to see where your resources are planning on spending their time. So if you do have over allocations in your plan, the resource usage view is where I would come to see where the over allocation is taking place. There are a couple of different ways you can manipulate this view, which I will show you. To look at it on a timescale manner, you can look at it in a planned work manner. You can compare it to actuals as your project goes into execution. But this is a very good way to see by resource where all their assignments are. So you can see for Carol here, she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tasks assigned to her, and you can see just some data points about them. Overall for the project, she's scheduled to work 248 hours. How is that broken down? She's going to cost me $13,000. How is that broken down? And so on. So coming back to our project here, we're going to do some analysis of where our resources are, how much they're going to cost us, where are they spending their time. So the first one we're going to look at, we're going to hide our split view here. You can right click and click show split to hide it. We're going to go to our task sheet. I do have my cost table displayed up in the view section here, and then you click on table. Here is where you can adjust what column you want to see. For example, if you're interested in work, there is a work table, and it'll show you all of the data simply focused on work. The same goes for variance. You have some variance data points that you could do here. and then we have our cost here table here. So here I can see where I do not have my baseline set, so my variance is not comparing against, it's comparing against 0. But it does show me the total cost. It shows me for scope, it's going to cost me $10,852. And I can see a breakdown of exactly which tasks are going to cost me which amount that contributes to that dollar amount. Same thing for my line 0 up here. I can see my total cost for the entire project. I can also look at this in my resource sheet view. Whoops. Yes, this is what I wanted. And then I want to come to my table up here and click on work if I'm interested in seeing the work for my resources across the entire project, or my costs. Here is where I can see even my cost resource down there. You can see in blue, most recent change I made. You can see what cost my project manager is going to cost me. It's going to cost me $1,800 on this project. It does some calculations. It will compare to actuals as your project progresses and give you a remaining cost. I'm also going to look at my task usage view here. Over here on the left, I do have a table, and on the right, I have a time scale. So I can, if I want to, I'm going to let's click on our project management task. I can come to task and scroll to task, and it'll shift your time scale, which is very, very handy if your projects are long, weeks, months, even years. If you have it, it'd be very helpful to say, I don't see any numbers over here. If you click that scroll to task, it'll immediately jump over. So you can also apply a different table here. You can say, I'm interested in viewing my costs. It'll update this to show you your costs. This over here will be your work unless you tell it otherwise, which you can do by anywhere in your details column here. I can just right click and I can have my actual work. I compare it to my baseline work. Here is where you can also do some comparisons into what's actually going on in your schedule. At this point, you have your tasks, you have your resources, you have your assignments generated, you have given project a lot of information, and now you can use the different and many, many views in project to be able to manipulate, to see it in different formats for presenting to management, for example. And so it's just all about understanding where you can see that information. We're going to go ahead and compare that to our actuals. So when you do, it just adds an additional column here. So I can see for my determined project scope task, it's going to have 4 hours of work associated. And here's how that breakup is scheduled. It's going to scheduled to have taken place the beginning of November, and then it will progress from there. Here's the cost associated, the total, the variance, and all those other data points. I can also look at my resource usage view, which, as I mentioned, is very helpful in being able to see if and where you have over allocations in your schedule. I can see that for Brad, he is scheduled for 5 tasks here. I can see the name of them. I don't have my variance table. Let's have my summary table, but I may be able to see some more data points about it. So I can see summary. Let's see if I want to do some work or if I want to see some cost. I really have, the flexibility that I want here, and you can add additional columns if you like. You can see there's a lot of different options here. So you can really customize this view to be however you'd like to see it. So I can see for Brad, he has 5 different tasks, which means 5 different assignments. And so I can look and I can see the cost associated with each one. If I want to see where it's scheduled to take place, I'm just going to click on it, click scroll to task, and my schedule will jump accordingly. Let's look at our review software specifications. Let's scroll to that. This one's not scheduled to take place until November 24th, November 21st, 24th, the 21st, and then you can see where that time is going to take place. And as actuals are put towards this, you can see those in that second section there. Same with any additional of the data points that you'd like to see here. So that wraps up our assignment planning webinar. We do have several webinars coming up. Starting next week, we're going to have our project execution. Now that we have gone through all of the steps of defining your project, setting it up, getting your tasks in order and connecting them, making them relevant and relate to each other, and adding resources to the task. Now it's time for your project execution. Now it's live. What do you do? How do you track progress? And then after that, we're going to look at project reporting. We're going to look at some of the native project reporting and how you can customize that to fit your own needs. And then our last webinar of this series is going to be about custom fields and other options. It's kind of those miscellaneous options that are important to share with you. don't have a place in the rest of our webinars as easily. So we're going to cover all those here and how you can define custom fields and how to best use that for your organization. Because if there is a way that you say, how can I group my tasks by, and it's not native to project, then custom fields are the way to go. So you can view any of our previous webinars, or you can register for our upcoming webinars at the link below. And there is my email address. If you do have any questions as you're going through project and you just want to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to help.